reaction?
It really destroyed our family.
Knowing that you're with a maniac who's going to shoot you?
It was very hard to see what this person had done to her and strangling her and then cutting her throat.
How long were they tortured?
Who is this evil person?
Serial murder is sadistic.
The knife went through her part of her hands and her forehead.
There was one wound to the neck that is a disabling wound because you bleed freely.
Terrifying.
He had the gun on my son, handcuffs me, zip ties my neck, and puts a pair of swimming goggles on my face.
What I saw was a very vicious fight. Blood spray everywhere.
And irrational.
The car was doused with diesel fuel, and many matches had been struck to torch it.
For $600, is it necessary to shoot a woman and her young daughter in the head?
Over the next 2 hours, follow in the footsteps of serial killers who have never been caught.
The suspect currently finds victims in the mall parking lot.
The killer clearly knew there'd be couples in the area.
This guy wanted to control, torture, humiliate, and ultimately destroy.
What is happening here in small town New Hampshire?
He waited until things cooled off and resumed his killing spree.
This is E Investigates. Serial killers on the loose.
I was trying to protect my baby. He stabbed me 27 times.
A serial killer is somebody that murders more than one person with a cooling off period in between. Typically, you're going to see at least 3 or more murders.
Until about 1970, we weren't talking about serial killers. But after 1970, the number of serial killers in America seems to have soared.
Charles Manson, Jeffrey Dahmer, BTK. Before they were caught, homicidal maniacs like these spawned a culture of serial murder.
In the United States, there are about 20 serial killers a year, responsible for about 200 victims.
We started talking about your typical serial killer being a white male, above average intelligence, manipulative, and he's going to have a very active fantasy life. But we've seen females, we've seen Hispanics, Asians, African Americans get cuts across different social strata. We've seen it all.
They can be the most charming, involved people, but there's lurking underneath a very dark side. They just have an urge to kill.
Predicting who these prolific criminals maim, torture, and execute seems impossible. But when serial killers get away with their savage acts, the terror they cause can last forever.
Most of them are eventually apprehended, but a few of them can stay on the loose a long time, amassing a large body count.
When people hear the term serial killer in their own neighborhood, it connotes images of our worst fears, that somebody's going to take us by surprise or come into our safe haven and do horrible damage to our loved ones.
Repeat murders rarely happen in places like Boca Raton, Florida. The coastal oasis is famous for its opulence and its shopper's paradise, the town center mall.
This is the central point of Boca Raton. People from young students to families, visitors. This is the mall everyone frequents.
Boca Raton is a place where people generally feel safe. There has not been a lot of crime at this mall.
But over the course of 9 months in 2007, a killer transformed the town center into a human hunting ground.
The mall we're talking about is a very affluent mall, and these crimes occurred in the middle of the day.
People are scared to go to the mall, they're frightened. We've never had any tragedies of this magnitude happen before in Boca.
It certainly has been discussed. We have a serial killer on the loose here.
The first victim was 52-year-old mother of 2, Randy Gorenberg.
Randy was a kind of a person who was so full of life. She had a magnetic personality, and when she laughed, you just wanted to laugh with her.
On Friday morning, March 23, 2007, Gorenberg ran some errands at the Town Center Mall. She never came home.
About 4:30, 4:45, and I put the news on. I saw this black van, and I saw a body covered up. About maybe a half hour later, I got a phone call from my son-in-law. He was quite hysterical on the phone, and he said, "Heidi, you have to come here immediately." We pull up to the house, and then I saw my grandson sitting on the ground, leaning against a pillar. He jumped up, came running over to me and hugged me, and he says, "Mommy's gone. Mommy's gone." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, Mom is dead." And that woman that I saw on the news, that was Randy's body that I was looking at.
Randy Gorenberg was found shot and killed at an access road by Lawton Childs Park in the Delray Beach area.
She had been shot in the head at point-blank range, and she was thrown from her SUV.
The vehicle was found less than a mile north of there, parked behind a Home Depot, abandoned.
The Gorenberg case really didn't surface as a mall-related incident until the police traced back where she came from. They discovered on the videotape that she had left the mall.
In fact, at 1:16 p.m., security cameras captured Gorenberg exiting the shopping center between Sears and Neiman Marcus.
We observed her leaving the mall with her packages, walking toward her vehicle, which is parked in the parking lot there at the Town Center Mall.
We saw her walking, full of life, and that's the last scene we have of her. We don't have a picture of her getting into her van.
Police believe the killer first confronted Randy Gorenberg in the parking lot, but they have no proof.
There is no videotape beyond the entrances. The cameras were aimed toward the mall and the mall exits. The parking lots did not have surveillance cameras.
The final piece of recorded video came from the area near where the triggerman dumped Gorenberg's Mercedes SUV.
We did recover video from the Home Depot area, which showed a Mercedes being driven through the parking lot just after the murder. We don't know right now what transpired in those 40 minutes from when she left the mall. Her packages from shopping in the mall were missing from the vehicle. She was missing a pair of Puma sneakers that she had worn that day, along with a Cuba brand purse.
Randy Gorenberg did have rings on her hands that her family members didn't recognize. It's possible that she bought those rings at the mall that day, but the police were investigating the possibility that someone may have put these rings on her hand.
What evil person could look at a beautiful woman and shoot her in the head? How could someone do that? At close range yet? How could you do that? Who is this evil person?
5 months after the Gorenberg shooting, a second woman fell prey at the Town Center shopping complex.
On August 7th, we received a call from the valet over by the mall that a female had pulled up and that she had been bound in her vehicle with her son, and she reported that she had been actually abducted from the mall after shopping.
This is the young mother who was kidnapped. She hides her identity because she's still terrified of the gunman who took her and her 2-year-old son prisoner.
He was very calm, and that was the scary part. Like, everything seemed very planned out. I was just thinking, this is what people feel like before they're going to die.
The terror began in the Nordstrom's parking garage, where a ruthless thug zeroed in on Jane Doe and her toddler.
I walked to my car, I put my son in, started the car. I went to the back of the truck and put the stroller away. And that's when I heard my son cry, "Mama." I walked up to see what was wrong, and that's when I saw the guy sitting next to him.
Aiming a pistol at the 2-year-old, the man demanded Jane Doe's credit cards and cash. Then, he forced her to drive to an ATM.
He told me to take out $200. So I took out $200. He told me to take out another $200. And I did. And then he told me to take out another $200. And I did. And I kept handing it to him. And then when I went for the next $200, it denied me because I reached my limit. So when I gave him the money, I was like, all right, you're taking me back to the mall now, right? And he said, just drive.
We drove west from the mall to a parking lot where he proceeded to switch seats with her, placed her in the back seat, and then bound her feet with zip ties, put handcuffs on her hands.
Then he zip ties my neck to the headrest. He takes off my sunglasses and puts on a pair of glasses. They're plastic and they had black duct tape on the inside. And at this point, I don't know what to think. I know that I'm tied up and I can't see and my son's next to me, and I just start crying and begging him, please don't hurt us, please don't kill us.
For more than 30 minutes, the man drove Jane and her 2-year-old back and forth on Florida's turnpike.
He turned onto the turnpike on accident, and he was aggravated, you could tell. I was just trying to make him see that I was a person too, not trying to upset him, just trying to talk to him, just talking to my son, telling him that I loved him and that everything was gonna be okay.
Then, for no apparent reason, the gunman drove mom and son back to the mall.
He then reaches in the back and takes off the sunglasses and pulls out a pair of swimming goggles and puts them on my face.
Prior to leaving her, he took some of her identification and then just left the area. She was able to free herself and drove to the valet stand where they called for the police.
The police that first got there on the scene told my son's father that a woman had been abducted from there and murdered months before. I didn't even know about the woman before me. I had no clue at all.
Coming up.
We received a call shortly before midnight that 2 bodies had been found in a black SUV at the mall.
In March 2007, 52-year-old Randy Gorenberg was shot and killed after shopping at the Town Center Mall in Boca Raton, Florida. In August, at the same mall, a disguised gunman kidnapped and terrorized Jane Doe and her 2-year-old son. They survived. Still, most residents were unaware that a potential serial killer was targeting women at that location.
After it happened to me, I was definitely scared, but we just thought it was a robbery.
It didn't stand out. I got nothing more than a small press release about an incident with very few details.
In December 2007, 4 months after the Jane Doe incident, the gunman stalked Nancy Bochicchio and her 7-year-old daughter, Joey.
It was just the 2 of them against the world. My sister did everything for Joey. That was her heart and soul. Joey was extraordinary. She really was. She was loving, kind, generous, just like my sister.
On Wednesday, December 12, 2007, just days before her 8th birthday, Joey and her mom took a trip to the Town Center Mall.
Her birthday party was planned for Saturday, so of course Joey was excited.
The cake's ready!
On December 12th, we received a call shortly before midnight that 2 bodies had been found in a black SUV.
Nancy Bochicchio and her 7-year-old daughter were found in Nancy's Chrysler Aspen SUV right outside the Sears at Town Center Mall. Both had been shot in the head at point-blank range.
I didn't know where my sister was shot until the day of the funeral. That's where the casket could be opened. Joey, they had to cut her hair, and she was growing her hair for locks of love. She wanted to donate it. It was just getting long enough to donate. And they stuck a big bow on the side to hide where it happened. She looked like she had been terrified. It wasn't like Joey.
When the Boquiquios were found dead, the police initially said that their deaths were suspicious. It was a very sadistic manner of killing.
Nancy was bound and using zip ties. Her daughter had also been tied up. We believe they were shot in the vehicle, but as far as where that occurred with regards to were they at the mall or were they at a secondary location, at this point we don't know. We're confident that the suspect did not actually follow her out of the mall.
The videotape of them leaving the mall shows them walking hand in hand after doing Christmas shopping.
All we really know for sure is that after leaving the mall at 3:11, in the next 10 minutes or so, we know there was a 911 phone call made from her phone, which immediately hung up. Dispatch tried to call back and got no answer.
Approximately 10 minutes after the 911 call, Nancy's black SUV pulled up to a Bank of America near the Town Center Mall.
Money was removed from an ATM using Nancy's debit card. $500 was taken out. There's surveillance available from the ATMs, but it's of limited value at this point.
Nancy's cell phone and purse were found in Miami, placed apparently on the sidewalk. Easy to find.
Her cell phone was found by two homeless men. Police talked to them. They had no knowledge of the case, but that suggested that at some point, the man who killed the Boquiquios may have been in the Overtown section of Miami.
Almost immediately, investigators linked the Boquiquio murders to the August 7th Jane Doe abduction.
The Boquiquios case was remarkably similar to the August victim's story. In both cases, the victims were zip-tied. They were made to go to an ATM. And in both cases, they had goggles slid over their eyes with black over the lenses. FBI profilers have told me that this suggests some sort of signature. It's not necessary to perpetrate the crime, but it's something he has to do because he derives some sort of satisfaction from it.
Together with Jane Doe, the police developed a sketch of the killer.
The consistent description is a white or possibly Hispanic male, clean-shaven, possibly with a ponytail, about 6 foot, 5'11", 170 to 180 pounds, wearing a floppy hat, sunglasses.
Since January 2008, a joint task force between the Boca Raton PD and the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office has been investigating the Boquiquio murders alongside the Randy Gornberg and Jane Doe cases.
The victims were all driving more expensive black SUVs with tinted windows.
Maybe it allows the suspect in these cases to conceal himself. He's specifically targeting this type of situation in the mall parking lot.
One of the pieces that investigators have looked very hard at is the low amount of money that is being taken in these cases. For $600, is it necessary to shoot a woman and her young daughter in the head?
The level of money received and the time frame between them would indicate that the motive is really more than just a financial gain. It's a control aspect.
That's what the police are considering as they look at the possibility of serial killing. This person arrived prepared with materials that he could use, and he was there to do something bad.
Still, the question remains, why did the gunman murder 3 people but allow Jane Doe and her son to live? One theory suggests both Randy Gornberg and Nancy Boquiquio fought back.
Nancy had handcuffs on her hand, however, these handcuffs were broken. We don't know if Nancy broke them in a struggle or the offender broke them.
From the minute I heard, there wasn't a doubt that she fought for Joey. How long were they tortured? Who was first? Not that it makes a difference how awful it had to be for either one of them to be the second. I just hope it was quick. I just pray to God that they were right next to each other, at least that my sister was able to hold her.
Can you imagine sitting in your car in the middle of the day in a busy area and you're with a maniac who's going to shoot you and that your life is going to be over? Can you imagine how frightened she was? Yes, she would fight. She would fight like hell.
I don't know why I'm still here and they're not. I go through this scenario over and over again, and I go through knowing what they went through and what they felt before they were murdered. And it's difficult to deal with that.
Since the murders, the Town Center Mall installed cameras in the parking lot areas and beefed up security patrols. But that's little comfort for the families who've suffered at the hands of a heartless killer.
I always want to know why. Why was she targeted? For what reason? What did they gain out of it? What did they gain?
Does he think about them? Is he able to sleep? Because I know we're not. We have no rest and no peace.
Whoever did this, I want to know why. Why you did it.
I want to see him go to jail and pay for what he did. And I pray that it doesn't happen to anyone else.
In southeastern Virginia, there is a strip of land nestled between the York and James rivers known as the Peninsula. The area is rich with history from colonial times. But during the late 1980s, a serial murderer wreaked havoc across the region, resulting in a string of unsolved double homicides.
All these cases have a certain commonality. They all involve couples. They were all white. They were in remote locations. The killer clearly knew there'd be couples in the area and picked the victims based upon the location they were in.
The first two victims were 21-year-old Rebecca Dowski and 27-year-old Kathleen Thomas.
Miss Thomas had been a Naval Academy graduate, was a stockbroker down in Norfolk. Dowski was a very well-liked young woman from William and Mary.
Becky was like a lot of other 21-year-olds. She had a lot of energy and a lot of love for life. She had a great spirit and a sense of humor. She was, you know, I think she was trying to find herself in terms of exploring what she wanted to do in life.
The idea that a college student would be killed along with a Naval Academy graduate was pretty shocking to people.
Dowski and Thomas were last seen alive on Thursday night, October 9th, 1986.
We know that Becky was at a computer center on campus. They really weren't able to place where exactly her friend was.
That Thursday night, they were seen at a restaurant near Yorktown.
There was a gap of 4 to 6 hours of time where it's difficult to track where they were. But during that time is when they were killed.
I think it was entirely possible that they left the Yorktown pub, that they went somewhere else, they were accosted.
On Friday morning, a jogger found Rebecca and Kathleen dead inside a car on a hillside next to the Colonial Parkway.
There was no indication that robbery was a motive. There were purses were still there were credit cards and identification cards and money in the purses.
Thomas was in the hatchback of her Honda, and Dowski had been stuffed in the back seat.
They were suffocated. The medical examiner believed that they were strangled with something like a clothesline that had a noose in it.
There was some evidence that they had been bound, and their throats had been slit, so they were overkilled.
There wasn't enough blood, evidently, to indicate that they were killed in the car.
Our sense was that the crime occurred on the parkway, pretty much where the car was found. We tried very carefully not to foreclose any possibility.
I think they were taken there for whatever reason, just to dispose of the bodies or to get rid of the car. I don't know why this person chose this place.
The car was doused with diesel fuel, and there were many matches that had been struck in an effort, apparently, to torch it. It didn't burn.
Somebody tried to push a hatchback over a cliff. It got caught in the bushes and trees, and that's where they were left.
Murders just didn't happen on the 26-mile-long Colonial Parkway, a road that connects the historic cities of Yorktown, Williamsburg, and Jamestown.
The parkway has parking places along the way, pull-offs, so to speak, and it's not unusual to see cars pulled over on the side day and night. It overlooks the York River. It's wooded, and it's a very scenic area.
The parkway has been known for years to be a place for lovers and sweethearts to go.
There was a place on the parkway not far at all from where Dowski and Thomas were discovered that was well known in the gay community.
There was speculation that Becky was involved somehow with this other woman. I don't know whether it's true or not true. I don't think that's really an issue.
I think they were singled out because they were vulnerable to a person who was out looking for victims. This seemed to be a violent attack, not necessarily pre-planned. My opinion is the killer who came upon them and for whatever the reason was incensed, overkilled them and pushed them away.
I think the most difficult thing was going to the morgue and having to identify the body, and it was very hard to see what this person had done to her in terms of strangling her and then cutting her throat, and to realize how difficult a death that was. I mean, that's not something that happens quickly.
We did an extensive investigation, and we made a very significant commitment in manpower and effort to solve it.
Police knew they had a lot of suspects, but at some point the leads and the prospects just dried up, and then these other killings started to happen.
Coming up.
I think David tried to make a run for it, or tried to fight it, because he got shot in the back.
In southeastern Virginia, a vicious cutthroat murdered 2 young women in October 1986. The double homicide appeared to be an isolated act of violence at the time.
My opinion is the Dowski-Thomas murders were committed by a disorganized killer. Disorganized killers usually have low IQs. Their attacks will be vicious and almost spontaneous. However, sometimes a killer can begin in a very disorganized style, and as they progress and become serial killers, they get better at their craft.
11 months passed before the emerging serial killer executed 14-year-old Robin Edwards and 20-year-old David Knobling.
David was complicated. He could be a little monster at times, and then he was the sweetest person ever. He was very considerate. He was a gentleman.
He had his own place, he had his own vehicle, he had a decent job making good money. He was just getting his act together.
On Sunday night, September 20th, 1987, David met Robin Edwards for the first time.
They weren't even supposed to meet. Me and my cousin Jason wanted to get together with Robin. David was just going to drive us to the arcade. We hung out there for at least an hour, hour and a half or so. When we left the arcade, we went and dropped Robin off. Then me, David, and Jason came back to our house.
I guess about 11:30 or so, then David said he had to go somewhere, so he took off. That was the last time we saw him.
The authorities don't know where David went next, but they believe that sometime around midnight, he met back up with Robin, and the two of them drove together to nearby Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge.
It's a quiet little spot where people just kind of hang out, right beside the James River Bridge. It's got paths to go through the woods, a long pier that goes out along the water.
They apparently were parked in an area that was considered a lover's lane kind of place.
It was raining. The truck was found by a sheriff's deputy late at night with the radio on and the windshield wipers going and a wallet out on the seat.
The truck was just parked there, keys in it, window down in the rain.
He'd have never have left that truck like that. I mean, no way. He loved that truck.
I went over there and we looked around, police looked around. They said, okay, well, there's no evidence of any foul play. And that's when I brought the truck back then.
It was never processed to reveal any kind of forensic evidence.
There wasn't until later that somebody realized these kids never showed up, and they started dredging and searching, and nothing happened.
At low tide on September 23rd, a beach walker discovered Robin Edwards' body along the shoreline at Ragged Island.
The police, all the different FBI and sheriff's departments and coroner, all of us went down there. I didn't even go over there where Robin's body was. And we walked about 50 yards further, and that's where David's body was. And I identified him right then, that it was David. The thought in my head was, damn, I found my son dead. You can't describe it. I didn't break down, but I had to move. I had to go away from there because I couldn't see my son laying there like that. Why did somebody have to do this?
What we believed happened is they were killed away from their vehicle. They were marched 1.5 miles to a wooden dock where they were both executed.
I think David tried to make a run for it or tried to fight it because he got shot in the back. They shot him in the shoulder to stop him. And then once they stopped him, he got shot in the back of the head, execution style, same way as Robin did.
I could not, for the life of me, figure out why somebody would want to do that. You know, I mean, there's no way they were doing something so drastically wrong that they deserve to die, especially in such a terrible way.
It's just a senseless killing. It's just unfathomable that someone would deliberately kill my son.
In April 1988, 18-year-old Cassandra Haley and 20-year-old Keith Call became the latest targets.
Keith was a good guy with a good heart. He loved his family. He was trying to do something with himself.
He wanted to study something with computers at the time. He was doing quite well. His life was very full, very happy.
Sandra was a very sensitive and loving person. She loved to laugh, she loved to dance.
She was a gymnast, she was a cheerleader, always smiling. Everything was headed in a positive direction, working and going to school. It was a wonderful time in her life for this to be happening. But it's just so sad because she had so much more to do.
Cassandra and Keith met in class as freshmen at Christopher Newport University. On Saturday night, April 9th, the two students went on their first date.
She was living at home. He picked her up at the house.
She introduced him to us, and he seemed like a very nice fellow. And when they got ready to leave, he said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll have her home early."
They were going to go to the movies, and then there was a party at the university.
They go and they hang out, and they leave fairly late at night.
A very close friend of hers said that they had seen him at the party and they were talking. And around 1:30, Keith and Sandra were seen walking through the parking lot as if they were getting in their car.
When they left the party, that was the last time that anybody had seen them that we know of.
Somehow, Keith's car ended up at a pull-off on the Colonial Parkway.
We had a pretty good idea that they got to the parkway around 2 or 2:15 in the morning. We tried very carefully not to adopt any theory unless it was really supported by fact, and so we didn't foreclose the fact that they could have been someplace else and taken there and the car dumped in that place.
The red Toyota had been abandoned on an overlook less than 2 miles away from where Rebecca Dowski and Kathleen Thomas were murdered 2 years earlier. Strangely, Keith's brother and father both drove past his car in that location before sunrise.
I was coming down the parkway about 3:30 in the morning, and maybe a half a mile before we get in the area where my brother's car was found, I noticed that there was a dark van that came out of a picnic area, which was very secluded, obviously. This van accelerated really fast, maybe 80 miles an hour, and my gut feeling says that the person coming out of the wooded area knows what happened to my brother.
My dad had drove that parkway every day, He was going to work that morning, and he saw the car. The door was open a little bit.
He stopped and looked around a little bit and didn't see really anything out of the ordinary except for the fact that the car was there.
When my father found the car, none of Cassandra's stuff was in the car. None of my brother's clothes were in the car at the time, and the keys were not in the ignition. He wasn't assuming the worst or anything like that. He assumed maybe they were at the beach.
Mr. Call, the father, he shut the door and drove off to work.
The car was different when the park rangers investigated about an hour later.
When the rangers searched the car around 7:30 a.m., it appeared someone altered the crime scene.
Something just wasn't right. There wasn't any blood or anything like that we could see, but one of the doors was partially left open.
The keys were in the ignition. His billfold was on the console. His watch was off and in the car too.
Her purse was still there, and her wallet, and her checkbook.
Somebody had come back and put clothes in the car and left the door wide open.
They found Keith's shoes and pants and shirt and everything. They found her bra, one of her boots.
The park ranger thought, oh, you know, I got a couple of these crazy teenage kids skinny dipping again. And for several days, the official version of this was they did go swimming, but maybe they got dragged in and drowned.
That was kind of a far-fetched theory, simply because of where the car was parked, the embankment that they would have had to go down. It's just not conducive for someone to walk down and go to the river. At this time of year, water temperatures are pretty cool. And again, not really conducive to taking a midnight swim.
We searched extensively around the area where the car was found. We did an intensive investigation of the parkway. We could show that a number of people were there that evening, but there was nothing to connect them to the actual disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley.
Investigators theorize that Keith and Cassandra were murdered by the same person who already committed 4 other homicides in the region.
Behavioral science of the FBI and profilers, the Virginia State Police, determine you've got a serial killer on your hands, and there's enough commonality to believe that he committed these crimes.
And the commonality was they were all found in remote locations. They were at night. There was an effort to dispose of the bodies.
You could speculate that the killer became better in that he made an effort to hide the bodies. He apparently was totally successful in the Call Haley case because we don't have any bodies recovered.
We don't even have a place to go and put flowers on a grave. That's pretty bad. No place to go. I mean, he's in our hearts, of course. And we have pictures and everything, but I mean, he deserves so much better.
It really destroyed our family. Both of my parents died young. I guarantee you that having your son disappear off the face of the earth really shortened their life.
Every loving mother wants their child to never be forgotten. And she was a good child. She was a sweet child.
Not knowing, not having her. Sorry. I don't want to know the details. I just want to know where she is. I just want to know where her body is. I want to have some closure for my parents.
Coming up,
there was a possibility that the perpetrator had taken control by appearing to be a police officer.
By 1989, federal and state profilers were convinced that a serial killer was responsible for 4 murders and 2 suspicious disappearances in the Virginia Peninsula.
Well, there are some indications in these cases that the offender had some type of water affinity. The bodies are near or in water.
The ropes that were used to tie up Dowski and Thomas for the type of road commonly used by guys who work on the water.
The use of diesel fuel. There was an attempt to set the car on fire. Diesel fuel runs a lot of the big boats that are out there.
It could suggest the killer might make a living on the water or certainly hangs out around the water.
Late in 1989, the killer moved inland, claiming 20-year-old Daniel Lauer and 18-year-old Anna Maria Phelps as victims number 7 and 8.
She was great. She had a good personality. Everybody got along with Anna. She was a good girl.
She was just a character, she really was. She was a bubbly person, she was happy.
On Labor Day 1989, Anna was supposed to help her boyfriend's little brother Daniel move to Virginia Beach. Late in the evening, they headed for the Atlantic coast down Interstate 64.
They were supposed to arrive down at Virginia Beach in the early morning hours. And her boyfriend called looking for them. And they weren't there.
It was 5 o'clock the next day. The policeman told me they had good news and bad news. Good news was they found the car. Bad news, nobody, nothing.
My heart just fell to the floor. I was hoping for the better, but I thought the worst.
Their car, we think, stopped at a rest area on the side going to Virginia Beach.
Phelps and Lauer were headed in an eastward direction, but their car was then found at the New Kent rest area on the other side of the interstate, pointing in a direction away from their expected direction of travel.
The person working at the rest area reported that car had been sitting there all night.
And it was abandoned. They were gone from the car.
Lauer's deserted Chevy Nova bore the signature of the suspected serial killer from the 3 earlier cases. Inside, cops found the keys in the ignition, Daniel's wallet and some of his clothes, as well as Anna's purse. A blanket was missing from the back seat.
And none of it makes sense. They wouldn't have left the car. And much less her purse and none of that stuff.
You do not separate a young fella from his car. He's not going to leave the car down there at the rest area. Something bad happened to separate him, very bad.
And the police realized we have at least a missing persons, if not a double homicide going on here.
It was terrible. Something's missing and you hurt like hell and you want it back.
Me and everybody else in the family that went out all in that area looking, but we didn't go in that far enough back in that logging road.
On October 19th, after 6 weeks of searching, woodsmen found Daniel and Anna's remains on a logging road 2 miles from the rest stop.
These bow hunters are back out in the woods and they stumble on these bones with a blanket over them. And it's the blanket from the car. And the bodies are badly decomposed.
Lauer had suffered knife wounds, but the autopsy couldn't classify his death other than homicide. Anna Marie Phelps had been stabbed and was probably the cause of death.
Kill my daughter like that, stabbing right there, and the knife went through part of her hands and her forehead. You got to be mentally arranged to do something like that.
They were probably abducted from the eastbound rest area. They were taken into the woods. They were possibly killed there. Their bodies were disposed of there. Then the car was brought back to the rest area on the westbound side. When you start moving bodies and cars around, it shows a comfort level that's pretty scary.
Whoever it was, they got Danny at first, I think, and then they grabbed Anna. They didn't rape her. They just killed her for some reason. How can anybody do that? How can anybody be so low? And it hurts. It's just like somebody ripping their hand right through your heart and just ripping it out.
The only thing I can do is try not to think about her. And that makes me mad because it feels like I want to give up on it, and I don't. I miss her.
In 1990, authorities went public with details about the 4 double homicides they linked to a serial killer in the Virginia Peninsula.
Somewhere out there, there's a predator. We have the same geographical area,
that's involved. And probably what alarms us more than anything else is it appears that early on the victims were placed under some control.
In all these cases, we have an immediate overcoming of any resistance. And that's part of the profile. How did the offender gain such rapid control?
We certainly considered that there was a possibility that the perpetrator had taken control by appearing to be a police officer, and then it was too late for them to struggle.
An organized killer, if they became an authority figure using a uniform, that would have to be planned. They would have to have a weapon to take control. That would have to be planned. There was no sign of struggle in any of the vehicles.
So that would indicate maybe in some way, shape, or form the beginnings of these encounters were police stops.
Arguably, the drivers of the vehicles took out their wallets, took out their driver's license to display to an authority figure. Otherwise, I can't imagine why they would be out.
But if you look at how the victims in these cases were manipulated, it appears that there were actually two offenders. There's just too much activity with these victims, in my mind, to see only one offender out there maintaining control throughout the time frame of the event.
Most serial killers do in fact act alone, but most serial killers kill one person. Every one of these victims were couples. Thus, the killer or killers had to be enough force to take control.
So now we have an individual out there smart enough to bring somebody along, a helper that he can control, smart enough to kill 8 people many years ago and still be out there.
The suspected homicidal duo has never been caught, and the families they victimized still have not found justice.
She's gone and there ain't nothing we can do about it. If I could get my hands and kill the person that did it to him, what is that going to do? What's that going to accomplish? Because anger and that stuff is just going to tear me apart. It hurts.
Keith was a good person. He didn't deserve to not exist anymore. If there's anybody out there that knows anything, it's been 20 years. We'd like to know what happened.
My greatest wish is to find out why. I believe if David was still here, my life would be totally different. He didn't let me get in trouble, you know? Definitely miss having my older brother.
Think about she would have been 39. Sorry. And she would be married and probably with children now, and that's a big part of my life I'd love to have. That could have been.
Nothing that happens will bring Becky and her friend back, nor the other victims of these crimes. And it doesn't matter how long it is. I mean, 20 years later, I'm still angry that somebody murdered her and has not had to pay a price for doing that. People that can do this kind of thing to another human being shouldn't be walking around out there.
Into the 1980s, we saw a lot of serial killers on the loose.
The whole concept of serial murder was relatively new. They were not common occurrences, especially around here, as they would become. This series of killings changed the sense that the Connecticut River Valley was a peaceful and safe place. Once that's gone, you're never going to get that back.
In December 2005, 56-year-old Eileen Nicolau went into hiding after being attacked by her husband, Michael.
Eileen fled from Georgia and went to her sister's home in Tampa. Michael Nicolau tracked her down, loaded a guitar case full of guns, went to her sister's house.
On New Year's Eve, the enraged husband caught up with his wife.
I was here at the house with my sister Eileen. My niece walks in and her head's bowed down. I see Michael walking right behind her, wearing a trench coat. My sister looked at him and said, "You know, what are you doing with a gun?"
He forced Eileen and Eileen's daughter, Taryn Bowman, into a back bedroom, held them hostage.
I called the cops and I was scared. The police came and they took me around the block and we were waiting for the SWAT, and then we heard the shots. And he had shot my niece, my sister, and then he shot himself. This is the bullet hole where my sister was standing, and he shot her, and the bullet that went through her went through this armoire. It's a constant reminder of what we went through that day.
The killings might have been written off as simply a tragic domestic incident. But the next day, an article about the double murder-suicide caught the eye of private investigator Lynn Marie Carty.
I opened up the newspaper, and on the front page of the St. Petersburg Times on New Year's Day, 2006, I couldn't believe it. I saw his name, Michael Nicolau.
Nicolau was a Vietnam vet with a history of psychological problems and violence. For 4 years, Lynn Carty had been looking at Nicolau as a suspect in the disappearance of his previous wife, Michelle Ashley, who was reported missing from Holyoke, Massachusetts in 1988.
I just got this weird feeling, and I thought to myself, you know, I need to look. What other women had a problem of any kind near the time frame and a location that Michelle went missing?
Carty's investigation eventually led her to some startling conclusions related to a string of young women who were murdered during the 1980s, all in the same geographic area.
In the Connecticut River Valley, before the murders, was a typical New England area on the Connecticut River, encompassing parts of New Hampshire, parts of Vermont, filled with small towns. And people lived quiet, peaceful lives.
On May 30th, 1984, a 17-year-old girl disappeared from Claremont, New Hampshire.
Bernice Kudemarsh was last seen hitchhiking to a location in Newport, New Hampshire.
She was supposed to meet her boyfriend about 10 miles to the other side of Claremont. Never showed up in that location.
By the next day, her family had reported her as a missing person. At the time, it just seemed like a typical report of a 17-year-old girl missing.
That leaves a big void as to, you know, where did she go, who picked her up.
On July 20th, 1984, Ellen Freed became the second woman to disappear from Claremont.
Ellen Freed was talking on a public telephone at 2 o'clock in the morning. She witnessed a car passing by which was suspicious to her. In fact, she mentioned that suspicious car in the course of her telephone conversation.
She had driven to this public phone. That's where we last placed her. The car was found at one end of Claremont. It was locked. Some of her personal belongings were in the car.
With the disappearance of Ellen Freed, the law enforcement concerns were heightened. All of the surrounding law enforcement agencies, including into the state of Vermont, were actively investigating the whereabouts of these two victims.
These were young women with ties to the area. It just defied probability that two women would vanish like that. In a fairly confined period of time, I certainly was convinced that there was a problem there that had to be looked at.
On July 10th, 1985, 27-year-old Eva Morse vanished from the highway.
She was a single mom. She was on her way to Claremont from Charlestown. We had a witness who placed her on the road hitchhiking.
It was later that afternoon when her family and friends reported her as missing.
This was a third missing female that we had in less than 14 months. What are we missing? And what aren't we seeing? What is happening here in small town New Hampshire?
At the time, I thought maybe they had a serial case that was starting up in that area.
Coming up.
The bodies were not separated by a great distance. All of this was too much to just dismiss as coincidence.
In the mid-1980s, three young women, Bernice Kudemarsh, Ellen Freed, and Eva Morse, disappeared from the Connecticut River Valley. Without a viable explanation for why the women went missing, a wave of panic swept through the community.
All of a sudden, out of the blue, a number of young women go missing from this relatively small geographical area. Defies reason. What were the odds against this sort of thing happening in an area like this without there being some sort of outside force at work?
Well, now it's a year and a half after the first disappearance. The initial fear, bordering on terror, has subsided a little bit. And then the bodies begin to turn up.
On September 19th, 1985, a very significant event occurred. Ellen Freed's deceased body was found alongside the Sugar River. This is the general location of where Ellen Freed's body was found. Approximately 200 yards up there in and amongst trees and some slight underbrush.
The fact that the killer dumped Freed's body near the banks of the Sugar River puzzled investigators.
And remember that she was last seen on the phone in Claremont, New Hampshire. Now the remains of her is found over in Newport, New Hampshire, probably 8 or 10 miles away.
During the course of the autopsy, there were certain indicators on the bones which may lead to the conclusion that she may have been stabbed.
On April 15th, 1986, a new victim surfaced in the Connecticut River Valley.
We got a call late in the afternoon of a homicide at the Moore residence.
It was the first really warm day of the spring. Linda Moore had been out sunning herself. She walked into her house, and clearly someone walked in behind her.
Linda Moore had been stabbed to death.
What I saw was a very vicious, hard-fought fight. Blood spatters and spray everywhere. I could see defensive wounds on her body. So I knew she put up a tough fight. We're talking multiple stab wounds. It was gruesome and a vicious crime scene.
4 days later, another body turned up 30 miles away in Claremont, New Hampshire. The second of the 3 missing women had been discovered.
It was on April 19th of 1986 that hikers in the woods found the deceased body of Bernice Kudermarsh in this river, approximately 300 yards upstream.
Bernice had been missing for almost 2 years. Her body was found near the Sugar River, the exact same waterway where authorities discovered Ellen Freed's remains 7 months earlier. An autopsy revealed similarities between Kudermarsh's murder and the deaths of both Linda Moore and Ellen Freed.
We were able to establish a cause of death in that homicide, and it was a death that was caused by stab wounds.
6 days later, Eva Morse's body was found in West Unity, New Hampshire.
Eva had disappeared in July of 1985, and it was approximately 12 months later that her body was found in this location up on Dunham Road. There was a certain amount of decomposition that took place, but nevertheless we were able to render a cause of death, that of stab wounds.
At that point, I was totally convinced that there was a serial killer at work in the area.
The Eva Morse investigation renewed interest in another body found on the same parcel of land 5 years earlier.
Elizabeth Critchley's body was found here in August of 1981, approximately 300 yards in that direction off a small logging trail.
That was 2 bodies that had turned up in Unity. That was what brought Elizabeth Critchley's case into consideration as part of the Valley murders. Before that, she had been seen as an isolated victim.
Although police were unable to establish a cause of death, the circumstances of Elizabeth Critchley's murder fit a profile similar to the other women whose bodies turned up in the Connecticut River Valley.
All 4 were available and somewhat vulnerable. 3 of these victims were hitchhiking, and 1 was on a public telephone at 2 o'clock in the morning.
My sister, you know, she was hitching, which she's just such a trusting soul, I think. Once the body was found, it was pretty horrible.
All 4 of these victims were also found in a wooded area, in a remote section off of a dirt road.
My sister was supposedly wrapped in a 10-foot by 12-foot black plastic tarp, and not that far off the dirt road.
The bodies were not separated by a great distance. All of this was too much to just dismiss as coincidence.
There was a pretty general theme that ran through the killings. The women were cut in their neck, which is the way that soldiers are taught to disable their victim.
The use of the knife, first of all, there was a connecting piece of information. Second, and even more critical, a knife kill is a fairly intimate kill.
You don't get knife killers commonly, and to have more than 1 knife killer in the valley is just very unlikely.
3 of the victims worked in hospitals or nursing homes.
So that again was a common denominator in my mind. You always wonder, is there a pattern here we're looking at?
I think by that time, probably the majority of people expected another attack.
On January 10th, 1987, another nurse, Barbara Agnew, vanished on the way home from a ski trip.
Barbara allegedly had left the mountain at 10 o'clock at night in order to arrive back home.
It was a terrible snowstorm, fairly late at night, and she pulled into the rest area in White River on 91.
By Sunday, she hadn't returned back, and the police were contacted.
And she was classified as a missing person for some time after that. But again, in your heart as an investigator, you know this is a homicide.
Days later, when they found her car, there was significant blood splatter in the car. And that was the first clue that we were talking grave concerns.
Nearly 3 months later, Barbara's corpse was discovered.
There were signature wounds that were very distinctive. There was one wound to the neck that is a disabling wound because you bleed freely and you lose strength. And then multiple stab wounds, self-defense wounds, knife wounds.
Barbara Agnew was almost a carbon copy of Linda Moore and was too much to just overlook at the time.
From my point of view, there wasn't any question that he was going to strike again.
The next victim, a young woman driving home late at night on New Hampshire's Old Homestead Highway.
On August 6th of 1988, Jane Borowski had pulled into Garmello's Marketplace in the town of Swansea. She was coming back from a fair at about 12:30 in the morning. She was 7 months pregnant at the time.
It was just real muggy and hot. They had a couple of vending machines, so I got a soda and I got in my car, and that's when I noticed a vehicle had pulled up beside me. And it was a Jeep Wagoneer. But I didn't think too much about it. The next thing I know, I saw him walking around the backside of my car. And I was scared.
He opened the door of her car, tried to grab her by the wrist. She pushed and kicked at him.
I started screaming. And matter of fact, I screamed so loud that I broke the blood vessels in my eyes. Next thing I knew, he took a knife out and he put the knife up against my neck.
Eventually, he overcame her. He dragged her out in the parking lot and he started stabbing her.
He had cut my neck and I ran. He had tackled me down like a football player, got me on the ground and just proceeded to stab me. And all I can remember is trying to protect my baby, trying to get him so the knife would not hit my belly.
At that point in time, Jane basically plays dead. The suspect gets into his vehicle and he departs the area.
He got up and walked away, so cool and calm and collected and just like he was going on with his business. And I had been on my back, so I had rolled over to my hands and knees. And as I was getting up on my hands and knees, I could see him drive by me. And I think that's a vision I'll never forget.
Extraordinarily, he didn't stab her anywhere around her belly. Jane was able to get herself up, get back into her car, and drive out looking for help.
I can remember waking up in intensive care and they were describing all my injuries, which were cut my jugular vein. I had 2 collapsed lungs. He had a tendon in my knee. He had a tendon in my thumb. And they predicted between 23 and 27 stab wounds.
She's extremely fortunate that nothing hit vital organs that would have caused her death.
My baby. He ended up having problems. I ended up having her about 2 weeks early. She was born a blue baby with no blood pressure, so now she has mild cerebral palsy.
For Borowski, the memories cut deeper than her wounds.
I've been in the hospital twice for mental breakdowns. I've suffered depression. I've been suicidal. I have compulsive disorders. I have trust issues. I'm not the person I was before I was attacked.
Jane will never understand why she was the one who survived, especially when her savage assault seemed eerily similar to the murders of the 6 other women who were methodically slain in the Connecticut River Valley.
It started coming out in the paper that my attack may have been stemmed from a serial killer. So I was very scared because I'm thinking, he's killed before, he tried to kill me, is he gonna come back and kill me?
This guy had places that he wanted to go by to see who was available, who was in his trap line. He was willing to stab immediately if he had to. He wanted to control, to transport, to torture, humiliate, and ultimately destroy.
In December 1988, 22-year-old Michelle Ashley disappeared from Holyoke, Massachusetts.
When the police arrived in her apartment, they found the Christmas presents were all wrapped and underneath the tree. Nothing was open. There was spoiled food in the refrigerator.
Before she vanished, Michelle allegedly told her mother, "If I'm ever missing, he killed me," referring to her husband, Vietnam veteran Michael Nicolau. But for 13 years, the missing persons case stayed off the radar.
When police finally interviewed Michael Nicolau about this, his first response was that he didn't know who they were talking about. And that was a red flag to me.
Nicolau's spotty past also roused the interest of private investigator Lynn Marie Carty. In 2001, she was convinced the ex-soldier played a role in the disappearance.
I called up Michael Nicolau and I said, I was asked by your wife's mother to find her daughter, Michelle, and the 2 grandkids, where are they? And he said, the grandkids are great. He said, but Michelle was a slut, and she ran off with a drug dealer. And he said, how did you find me?
In a twist that brings this story full circle, Nicolau was the same man who would later kill his next wife, his stepdaughter, and himself in 2005. The violent deaths confirmed Carty's research that the war hero was a dangerous man with a history of mental problems.
His flying buddies in the war told us quite amazing stories about him being in love with his knife. That he would land his helicopter in enemy territory, take out his knife, leave them there in danger, and say, I'm going hunting for humans.
Here was a guy who had the background that fit the combination of methodical mind and savage mind, in whose life there were enough question marks so that somebody had to take a good look at him.
And that's when Lynn began to uncover a set of information about the murders in the Connecticut River Valley.
Lynn Marie had contacted me the beginning of 2006 after Michael Nicolau had killed himself. And it was pretty overwhelming. Everything fit with him. I saw his picture and I was like, yeah, there's similarities. When I look at Nicolau, it's like I'm looking at that composite. I personally have no doubt in my mind that it was Nicolau that attacked me.
With Borowski's positive ID, Carty went to the New Hampshire and Vermont State Police Departments.
He became a person of interest to us. The private investigator has circumstantial evidence that may put him in the same location at certain times, maybe in possibly a specific vehicle at times. I'll do what I can to follow up on that information if there's any way I can link him to these cases.
Michael Nicolau may have carried the secret of who committed these vicious attacks to his grave. But until police can solve the crimes, the families will continue to live without closure.
You need to know more than you ever wanted to know. To not have a conclusion to it, it's like murder is free.
I feel lucky that I survived, but I also feel guilt. I want answers just like their families want answers. I just always think about the families. A lot.
I just wish that we could find out what happened to these people and find out why it happened. Who is responsible? And I'm not sure if that'll ever happen.
Coming up.
My best friend was murdered down there.
If you have any information related to the Connecticut River Valley murders, please contact the New Hampshire State Police at 603-271-2663 or the Vermont State Police at 802-241-5355.
When a serial killer has an urge to kill, they look for opportunity. If the opportunity is on the street, they're going to go for somebody they find on the street.
It's easier for the killer to get away with murder when he targets prostitutes. As we speak, there are now prostitute slayers in almost every major city.
That includes Daytona Beach, Florida. The oceanfront vacation city is best known for Bike Week and spring break. But to locals, it's not all sun and sand. Just west of the coast, there's a seedy underbelly.
There's a section of Daytona called Ridgewood Avenue where there's problems with crack cocaine. There's a lot of homeless people.
That's usually where you find the ladies of the night walking down the street. A lot of them are at risk for violence in their life. They're out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, trying to make a living.
In 2005, a serial killer began executing these high-risk women one by one.
Nobody deserves what these women got. They were human beings, no matter what they did.
45-year-old Laquita Gunther was the first victim. She had an arrest record for drugs and prostitution.
She was a good girl till, later on, so. She got into drugs, and then it just downhill from then on.
The lifestyle that she lived, it did put her at a high risk for something bad to happen to her.
On December 24th, 2005, Laquita was supposed to go to her friend Stacy Dittmer's house for dinner. She never showed.
I thought she blew me off. Then I got mad. And then I went looking for her.
December the 26th, 2005, the body of Laquita Gunther was found between two buildings on Beach Street. She was fully clothed, and the only trauma to the body was a single gunshot wound.
I never dreamed that would be her. This is where Quita was found. All the way back here and past these poles. My best friend was murdered down there. And some bitch killed my best friend. And went on Christmas Eve. I think she was trying to run away and run down that way. And she didn't make it.
It was right across the street from a bar in that area called Chubby's, and Laquita was very popular at Chubby's. I've gone into that bar a couple of times to ask people questions. Everybody's like, I don't know anything. Somebody must have seen something that night, but people just are not coming forward.
I'm still having nightmares. I wake up and think about it. It changes you. Parents are supposed to die first.
Next, the killer targeted 34-year-old Julie Green. She was a convicted drug user who associated with prostitutes.
Julie was always quite street savvy, but sometimes she put herself in situations that she thought that she wasn't at risk.
On On Friday night, January 13th, 2006, Julie left her house to apparently use a payphone several blocks away. She would have traveled through a section of Daytona known for pushing and pimping.
A friend of hers had told me that night she was going to be walking to Mason Avenue, which is a pretty busy thoroughfare in the city. He said that she went walking, he never saw her again.
The next morning, several miles across town, a construction worker made a gruesome discovery.
He noticed the body of a white female. He called the police. It was Julie Green. This is where she was found. She was the victim of a homicide, single gunshot wound.
For whatever reason, she met a stranger because nobody that she knew would do this. Whatever she got herself mixed up in, she didn't deserve what happened to her.
Now you're starting to see a pattern happening to the ladies of the night. Some of them were saying, I'm going to go back out in the street. I'm not afraid. I'm going to, I'll handle this myself.
35-year-old Iwana Patton became the third woman gunned down in 3 months.
She had recently moved to the area from New York. She was working as a nursing assistant.
Iwana Patton had at least one arrest for prostitution. So that would increase the risk of her being the victim. February 24th, 2006, about 1:30 in the afternoon, a passerby noticed the body, called the police department. We responded and found the body of a black female. She was the victim of a homicide, single gunshot wound. The position of the body indicated that there was some type of struggle just before she was shot.
After Iwana was found, a profiler in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement said, we have a serial killer in the city.
It's quite rare for a serial killer to use a firearm. Most of them stab or strangle or bludgeon to death. It's up close and personal. That's why they do it. They want to take the life from their dying victim with their own hands.
Through DNA and ballistics, we're positive that the same person committed all three.
Without a single eyewitness in any of the cases, the killer remained on the loose.
The police kept saying that this person was targeting women who live a high-risk lifestyle. There was definitely a fear amongst the prostitutes who were pretty much starting to hide.
22 months passed without another murder. It seemed as though Daytona's serial killer stopped cold turkey.
He knew that things were hot, so he waited until things cooled off and resumed his killing spree.
32-year-old Stacy Gage became the killer's next target.
She had 2 children, and she loved those kids, was a good mother to them. Frankly, I don't believe that she was a prostitute, but she got involved in drugs. We didn't know it, and she's just gotten worse and worse and worse.
On December 11th, 2007, Stacy's life reached a fatal crossroads.
About 10 o'clock or so, she took my car to go to the convenience store, and we never saw her again.
January 2nd, 2008, one of our police officers was doing a special check back here, noticed a foul smell, walked about 2 or 3 feet in, discovered the body of Stacy Gage, badly decomposed. She had been here about 2 or 3 weeks. She was the victim of a homicide.
Police came to the house, and they told me that it was Stacy. They'd found by her fingerprints. We were shocked, hurt. It's a horrible thing to have happen.
The police chief here has said that her murder was eerily similar to the other 3 women.
When a prostitute slayer is on the loose, many middle-class women don't feel concerned. The problem is that serial killers can start with prostitutes and then graduate with more respectable victims and take greater risks as they go along.
The investigation is hampered by a public perception that the victims are partly to blame for their deaths.
I think that there's a feeling that, prostitutes are throwaway victims.
Prostitution is the oldest profession in the world. And so if you continue to do that, then you put yourself at risk. But it doesn't give anybody right to kill anybody just because of their lifestyle. They are still human beings.
Quita was the first one murdered by the so-called serial killer. I've got her ashes locked up in this box. When we catch him, I'm taking her with me, and I'm gonna put her right up there. And there you go. Look what you did to my best friend. You shot her in the head on Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve.
The man who killed Laquita, Julie, Iwana, and Stacy is on the loose. Investigators are still hoping for a break in these cases.
There hasn't been a composite. Police have been swabbing the cheeks of people they arrest. They're trying to create a very large database of DNA to try to track down the killer.
We have been getting a lot of leads. A task force was formed. We're just hoping that somebody sees something and somebody remembers something.
They gotta find him, because he's gonna keep doing it. It's not gonna stop.
It's too late for these victims, but for their families and for society at large, there is hope that these serial killers will be found and stopped before they can kill again.
Science and technology has come a long way towards developing tools to catch them where they slip up.
Forensic testing has advanced dramatically. We can now apply to samples such as blood stains from older cases where the DNA was too degraded.
The future's an exciting one. I think we're going to continue to learn more about how their brains function, about the early precursors to this kinds of behavior that might enable us to develop treatments for a budding serial killer in adolescence or pre-adolescence.
We certainly have much more sophisticated ways of catching serial killers. It would be more difficult for somebody to outsmart authorities today.
Eventually they'll get caught for doing something and get tested, and then they're in the system. As soon as they make one misstep and they're tested, then they will be linked to all those cases where they left DNA.
In the stereotype version, serial killers are loners. They're socially isolated, but in reality, they're extraordinarily ordinary. They don't look like the monsters that they are, and that's why they're so difficult to apprehend.